Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is going to be a fun one. Welcome to the top 10 list of Batman allies. I'm using the word as it is defined in the dictionary. An ally is a person who associates, supports, or cooperates with another. So that makes this top 10 a rather broad one, as it basically is going to be me ranking and discussing some of my favorites among Batman's many friends and contacts. While I will one day likely make a list of just Batman's sidekicks, and of who Batman teams up with the best in the superhero community, this is a larger, broader umbrella list that includes sidekicks, fellow superheroes, and other members of Batman's network. As a result, this became a pretty competitive one. I included some honorable mentions in the video description if you are curious about the runners-up, but suffice to say there are some pretty big and important figures in Batman's life that were excluded because there are just so many good candidates. Just keep that in mind if some of your particular favorites didn't quite make it in. These are just my opinions and are likely not to match yours perfectly. And that's about it. So let's get started as we explore who I feel works best with the Dark Knight himself in my top 10 list of Batman's greatest allies. Number 10. Spoiler. So remember that these aren't necessarily the people that Batman works with best or his most trusted allies, but rather people I like seeing the most at his side. Let's get into exactly who Spoiler, also known as Stephanie Brown, is to Batman. Stephanie began her career as a vigilante known as Spoiler, often working with Tim Drake. When he was forced to retire, Stephanie manages to convince Batman to take her on as the next Robin, but Bruce thinks of her as too unskilled for crime fighting. Brown winds up fired after she fails to follow orders during 2 missions. Determined to impress Batman, Stephanie stole one of his plans for taking down the criminal underworld in Gotham, and attempts to enact it herself. Making a vital error, she quickly loses control over the plan, and the entire city erupts into warfare. Stephanie was badly tortured, and ultimately thought to be dead for a time at the hands of the Black Mask. She eventually returned as Spoiler and occasionally worked with members of the Bat family. After Bruce Wayne's apparent death, she took on the role of Batgirl, only to later discover upon his return that she was given this order as a final request of Batman in the event of his death or disappearance. There's something I really like about these two. Unlike most allies on this list, this is a relationship that historically has just not worked. There's something I find quite fascinating about this character and her story. She really does have her heart in the right place, but serves as an example of what it's like when somebody just isn't cut out for this line of work. Sometimes a dysfunctional relationship can be just as cool and informative as one that really works, and in the case of Batman and Spoiler, I've always enjoyed the tension between these two. I think Batman pities her and sympathizes with her, wanting to do a good thing, but time and time again he sees that the girl just doesn't have the skills in her yet. When you get right down to it, there's something wrong with what Bruce does with the various youngsters he sets up as junior crime fighters. It isn't really abusive, and more often than not these things work out. But you need characters like Stephanie to serve as a reminder that there is an inherent danger to taking on these kids as trainees. Don't get me wrong, Robin is a vital character to the Batman tale, and we'll get more into that later. But it is characters like Stephanie that are pivotal in reminding us why Bruce is usually reluctant to take on newcomers. It's dangerous, and things can go south really fast. But it's also a story of triumph. Stephanie does manage to come into her own as Batgirl. As opposed to her disastrous experience as Robin, she truly lives up to the name, and even earns the approval of Barbara Gordon herself. And I understand that Bruce secretly has a lot to do with setting her up as Batgirl. In some ways, she may have been one of Batman's worst students. Certainly the one whose actions put her and more people in danger than any Robin before or after. But her and Batman do manage to find common ground, and in that way, he took a struggling vigilante and helped form her into a true hero, making this also a story of at least a somewhat successful partnership. At least until the New 52 happened and all this was kind of wiped from continuity. Thankfully, Stephanie is gradually returning to the world of DC, so hopefully she and Batman will butt heads more on in the future. Number 9. Jason Todd. Okay, so not too long ago, Joey made a nice thorough review of the 4 Robins. so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on who Jason Todd is, or any other Robin character that might show up on this list. If you need to learn more about the second Robin, you can check out our Origins bio video, because I am going to assume from here on out that you know who this guy is. And again, we have another rocky relationship with Batman. I mean, it makes sense, as Batman is often a contentious person, but oh man, does Jason have it rough. From the get-go, it feels like this was an ill-fated team-up. Jason's origins are distinct from the other Robins, having been caught trying to steal the tires off the Batmobile. He, as a character, became quite unpopular among DC fans at the time, and they ultimately voted to kill him off, which was depicted when he was viciously beaten to death by the Joker with a crowbar. Death in the family alone kind of serves as an iconic reason to include Jason, but his return as the Red Hood has more often than not been also quite fun. Him and Batman do not always get along, to say the least, but they have since settled their differences and have begun to work together as true allies. And like with Stephanie, there's something I really like about a relationship with real history, and not all of that history being all that pleasant. It adds texture to any team-up, and usually serves to make for a more powerful story. In spite of all this ugliness, Jason is thoroughly a part of the Bat family, and the two have forged a bond of sorts with one another. But there's still something about Jason, something I also see in spoilers past. Like I said, it is a little messed up that Batman trains children for what is basically warfare, and puts them in a lot of danger. It's pretty easy to ignore that, as it's part of the whole suspension of disbelief thing, and Batman has pretty much always had a Robin, to the extent that I consider this sidekick to be a core part of Batman's identity as a character. The role of Robin generally brings vital energy and a certain dynamic, and is often a huge part of Batman's story. Where Batman is stoic and almost flawless in his preparation skills, Robin is often a source of inexperience that creates much needed development in the Batman series. As well, the youth and relative inexperience of the character raises the stakes and increases the sense of danger in Batman comics and other media, something that is often sorely needed. But it's characters like Jason that remind us why Batman gives his sidekicks a hard time, and why he's so reluctant to put them on the front lines to begin with. Like Stephanie, Todd reminds us how it can all go horribly wrong, a living representation of what Batman likely considers to be one of his greatest failures, while also serving as a source of tension as the Red Hood becomes increasingly part of the Bat family once again. He brings a lot to Batman's story, and definitely deserves a place on this list. Number 8. Green Lantern. So this is the last ally on the list that I admit does not actually get along that well with Batman. But that's the key. By learning about the historic and long-standing tension between Batman and Green Lantern, and that's pretty much any Green Lantern, not just Hal Jordan, you can learn a little more about Batman himself, which makes this a critically important ally to Bruce from a narrative standpoint. This tension stems from a recurring idea in comics, depicted with varying degrees of subtlety, that basically states while the Green Lantern Corps draw their power from their own internal will, Bruce has and always will rely on fear as a weapon instead. And for those of you who know a little something about the Corps, that's a big problem with the Green Lanterns, whose whole basis of power depends on their ability to overcome fear. Batman is so skilled at striking fear into the hearts of his enemies that he has been offered entry into the Sinestro Corps at least once in the past, and is currently in possession of a yellow power ring. And he has been shown to be quite adept at using this in certain emergencies. This naturally creates friction with pretty much any member of the GLC. The two of the most willful Corps members, Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner, stand out in particular. In spite of this underlying animosity, more often than not these two overcome their differences and work together as allies. In a good comic book, it's often the relationships that don't work that are more intriguing than the ones that do. Sometimes you can learn a lot about characters when they're challenged by others like this. And I think Batman and the contentious feelings he shares with the Lanterns is quite informative about what the Dark Knight stands for and where his power comes from relative to the GLC. It's pretty cool, and not necessarily a judgment of either hero, but just a reflection of their completely different philosophies and approaches to crime fighting. It is for this reason I consider the Green Lanterns to be one of Batman's best allies. Plus, look, Batman punched out Guy Gardner in one punch. Isn't that awesome? No, maybe it's just me. Number 7. Tim Drake. Yep, it's another Robin, and this one was great. Again, you can learn about Drake's origins in the 4 Robins origin and bio video, so I'm just going to talk about why I like Tim so much. Drake has a lot of characteristics that make him an ideal hero, and one that works well with Batman. He's fiercely independent and a determined crime fighter. But what I like most about Tim is how good of a detective the kid is. Drake stands out as one of the few people that ever correctly discerned Batman's secret identity, and he figured this all out by himself as a child. Too often, Batman is overlooked as a detective, with a focus instead on combat over the character's original concentration on solving crimes. Drake brings to the forefront this sense of those two working together as detectives instead of just as warriors, soldiers. There's nothing wrong with kicking ass, I just like it when the detective angle is satisfied too. And the fact that Tim is so smart and so good at deductive reasoning that this, more than anything else, really stands out. So I enjoy these two together. You can tell Batman really respects his abilities and the two work well together as a result. Therefore, he is one of my favorites, and has certainly earned his place as one of the very best. Number 6. Damian Wayne. I like Damian, I really do. I remember when I was first told about Batman getting a son, I kinda just balked at the idea. It seemed silly to me, and from my perspective, it looks as if they just threw together the toughest kid they could muster because, well, if we're gonna make Batman's son, he has to be totally flawless and serious, right? But when you actually delve into what Damian is like in the comics, a much more complex picture emerges. Damian is actually quite flawed. Out of all the Robins, I feel in a lot of ways it is Damian's youth that is the most realistic. Oh sure, not many children were raised by the League of Assassins, but Damian often acts more like a boy than most sidekicks I have seen. The kid is rash, prone to making mistakes, and impatient, which is what I remember being like when I was that age. But he also is brave, skilled, and confident. And I adore the relationship between father and son. Bruce is actually a very good father, all things considered. He is stern with the boy and sometimes cold, but he treats his son with respect and care. You can tell he loves the boy, and though Damian rarely shows it, he cares about his father too. And unlike when he puts other Robins in this position, I actually find Bruce's behavior with the kid quite appropriate. There's no way to keep Damian from getting himself in danger. This was a kid trained to be an assassin from birth. So Bruce does the only thing he can do. Give the child an identity and purpose and hope you're pointing him in the right direction. I consider Damian and Batman to be one of the best father-son relationships in comics, and as such, he is one of my favorite allies for the Dark Knight. Number 5. Barbara Gordon. Next up is one of my all-time favorites. As both Oracle and Batgirl, Barbara has proven herself to be a vital and capable ally to Batman. I've always enjoyed the complete faith Batman puts in the younger Gordon. As Oracle, she proved to be a critically important contact, running her own team and proving to be a source of help and information for Batman and the rest of the family. I kind of miss those days, but even as Batgirl, she can always come to Bruce for help or resources, and vice versa. As a superhero, Barbara tends to operate much more independently than one might think, but her feelings towards Bruce as an ally and source of inspiration underlie her story quite nicely. I get the impression that Batman really respects the young woman, and it is a well-deserved feeling as she is one of the most confident and skilled detectives, crime fighters, and contacts in Gotham next to the Caped Crusader himself. The fact that Barbara is only number 5 on this list is another indication of just how competitive this top 10 is, as I really appreciate the dynamics between these two when they work together, and I don't have anything really negative to say about this arrangement. Number 4. Superman. Yep, him being on this list should be pretty obvious, though some might be surprised that Supes only takes the number 4 spot. The reason why should become apparent as we get through the top 3, but for now, let's talk about why I love this classic team-up. On the surface, this has never really made much sense. To those less familiar with the comic book world, the idea of Batman, a character well known for having no powers whatsoever, being paired with Superman, one of the most powerful superheroes of all time, must seem a bit counterintuitive. But we all know there's actually a lot to these two, and when they work together, more often than not, it's a pretty great experience. These two cooperate surprisingly well. Though they don't always have the same approach when it comes to crime fighting, you can tell by now these two have forged a strong bond of mutual respect and trust. Of course, this isn't always a rosy relationship, and underlying these two is a certain animosity, largely driven by Bruce's paranoia and Clark's homespun optimism. This tension adds a lot to the story and gives things a bit more depth. It's not a perfect relationship, but it is a compelling one. Time and time again, we see these two putting instant faith in one another's abilities to save the day and sometimes each other. Out of the superhero community, it's safe to say that Clark is Bruce's greatest ally. They are a powerful team, and in my opinion, the moniker of World's Finest seems all too appropriate for these two. Number 3. Jim Gordon. So we are getting to the point where I feel these characters mostly speak for themselves. In film, television, and the comics, Jim Gordon is recurringly one of Batman's greatest allies, friends, and contacts. What's really cool is that Gordon is unlike most of those Batman gets close with, as he remains completely in the dark about his companion's real identity. Bruce very much trusts Gordon, and this is instead deliberately done to protect one another, given that this would put Gordon in a compromising position as a police officer otherwise. But not knowing Batman's real identity hasn't stopped these two from creating a strong bond of mutual trust. They look out for one another and show a certain faith in each other and their ability to do the right thing. It's very rare for a superhero, especially a street-level vigilante like Bruce, to work so closely with authority figures, especially when those figures are associated with the police. The fact that Gordon is somehow usually able to convince the rest of the force to work with Batman is pretty astounding. Oh sure, this took time and hasn't always worked out. All relationships have their ups and downs after all. But more often than not, this is a fruitful understanding for both parties. This partnership, while not totally unique in the world of comics, is quite distinct from how other characters usually interact with authority figures, and one that I really like for that reason. Bruce will always be there for Jim, and Jim will always be there for Bruce. He's as vital a part of the Batman story as any other major character, and one that I think really shapes and defines the tone of the Dark Knight himself. You know it, and I know it. Gordon is one of the very best allies Batman has, and one that can never truly be replaced. Number 2. Dick Grayson. Yeah, this one should also be quite self-evident. How important is Grayson to Batman's story? Well, while Batman first appeared all the way back in 1939, the very first Robin appeared, well, in 1940 actually. Yep, for pretty much as long as there has been a Batman, there has been a Robin, something I've always found quite interesting and an important counterpoint for people who don't like the character. And in spite of the fact that Robin gets routinely pushed aside or misinterpreted by idiot filmmakers, as I stated earlier, this guy is an important part of Batman as a character. It provides a source of development and flaws with a superhero that too often is presented as flawless and sometimes really stagnant. While all the other Robins deserved a spot on this list for this reason, it is Dick Grayson, the very first Robin, that I chose to rank the highest. Grayson has all the traits and abilities that make Bruce great, though he generally tends to make friends and be a little more agreeable than his mentor. As Robin, Nightwing, or whatever Grayson is nowadays, he always excels and brings something new and exciting to the table. He's not perfect, but he does his best. I also love how his abilities are rooted in his acrobatic past, making him to date a unique and fun superhero. Grayson is very much like a son to Batman. This was shown beautifully in the recent Forever Evil event, where Batman basically loses his mind when seeing Dick nearly get killed, to the extent that Bruce accidentally exposed his real identity to Lex Luthor. He also served as a great companion to Jason Todd during the rise of the Red Hood. But you see this in their relationship throughout their long shared history. Batman places absolute faith in the kid, first when he starts out as Robin, and again when he sets out on his own. And it was Dick Grayson who took Batman's place when he died for a time. They are always there for one another, often dropping everything to help out if need be. Of course, there are rocky moments. It's kind of hard for anybody to know Batman without there being rocky moments. But it is something that I also see these characters consistently look past in order to overcome whatever obstacle might be in their way. If anything, this tension adds to their story, and it reminds me of the tension one might see between an adult father and son, so I think these two work well together, and it's one of Batman's best and most successful relationships. And now, for for the #1 Batman ally, Alfred Pennyworth. Batman's greatest ally in my eyes is and always will be Alfred. Nobody else is dedicated to Bruce's well-being as much as Alfred. Nobody else is consistently committed to his endeavors as Batman. Alfred cares about Bruce and wants him to be safe, but he understands that this is something that Wayne has to do. This is who Bruce is, so Alfred does all he can to keep his employer alive and well. He also knew the Waynes and cared for them too, so more often than not the loyal brother very tacitly approves of what Bruce has done with his life. If Dick is like a son to Bruce, then Alfred is basically Bruce's adopted father. The butler has been instrumental in so many aspects of Bruce and his history. It would be impossible to cover it all in this video without making it unnecessarily long. Suffice to say, Alfred is pivotal in maintaining the Dark Knight's secret identity, as well as keeping the dual lives of Batman and Bruce Wayne operational. It's one of those things that every once in a while Alfred may get killed off, but it never really can meaningfully stick. He's too iconic and important a part of Bruce's life to ever really go away, and I wouldn't want him to. I love his banter with Bruce and the way he acts as an emotional center for the Wayne household. He is so important to Batman, and Bruce knows this. Alfred needs Bruce too, as it gives his life purpose and satisfies a shared need for justice the two men have. Alfred was pretty much always going to take this #1 spot. Nobody, not even Grayson, ever really stood a chance against this guy. The butler is Batman's greatest and most important ally, and is so critical to Batman's story. Alfred is my very favorite among those I consider to be Bruce's family, and to me, he truly is his most important and greatest friend. Sorry, Superman, but you got nothing on this guy. And that's it for the list. Let me know who your favorite allies of Batman are. This was by no means a comprehensive top 10. Batman has many great friends, and I feel bad for not being able to include all of them. But these are my favorites, and hopefully you enjoyed this list. Let me know what other kind of top 10s you'd like to see in the future. These are always fun to do, and though we have a lot of existing ideas and requests, Joey and I are always happy to take more on. You can find the full list of all our existing top 10 videos on our website, the link to which is provided in the video description. You can also find links to our Facebook and Twitter pages if you'd like to stay updated on all our latest content, as well as discussion about news in the world of comics. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.